Thanks for joining us today. We'll get started right at 11 in a couple minutes.
Hello and welcome to Cybersecurity at the Crossroads. I'm Jim Karp with Raymond, and we've got a team here today with us. And I'll introduce Jessica Dory as well as Jim Bruxburg. Jessica's been a member of our team for 17 years here, has been running our technology risk management platform. And so she has a lot of in-depth knowledge on cybersecurity and how it's grown over the years. So we've got a great panelist right there. Jim is our Chief Services Officer, and he's been with the organization just over 10 years at this point in time and has an in-depth knowledge of how you put everything together. So we've got a great panel all set for you here today. Folks, welcome, and we're glad you're here. Okay, so let's get started here real quick. So if you look at it, cars started as a luxury item. And if you think back in time, this is a picture of Henry Ford. And if you fast forward, cars became very popular. And when they became popular, over time they sped up. And as the speed increased, the likelihood of an accident happened. So what ended up happening is the industry ended up responding over a period of time, and they started adding safety features. Now, we have an eye chart for you here right now. We're not going to go through all the detail on this specifically, but back in the 1800s, the group of individuals there at that point in time started improving all of the different safety features. They had coil springs, you name it. You go all the way fast forward to the future. You've got all these just different technologies to the point today where you've got gesture controls, biometric access, you've got windshield displays, self-driving cars. So it's safe to say, as the car sped up, the safety features followed along with that. So then taking it one step further, if you look at it, starting from the beginning for a car, it's gone from very simple, where you have the Model T, to something like a Tesla, which is very complex. It also moved from being a luxury item to a necessity item. Now, here's the question right here is, can you buy a car today without the safety features that we've talked about right now? And the simple answer is no. It's baked right into the automobile itself. All right. So let's put that aside for a second and let's look at the progression of technology. And we're going to kind of run the parallel along those lines as well. So if you look to the far left here, technology started off in the data center. You had the interface, the logic, and the data. It was very simple. It eventually moved out of the data center into the desktop environment, eventually to the internet in the early 2000s, where you had the browser, the websites, the servers. Then we had the mobile revolution, where you had the apps as well as the cloud. And now today we're at the web 3.0 with the stack, where we're dealing with virtual reality, augmented reality, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, as well as the blockchain. So, a lot of people look at this differently. I kind of view it as basically back in a period of time, it was complex because the average person couldn't really deal with a computer. But if you think about it now, you look at something like the iPad or whatever type of interface tool you've got, it's become simpler for an end user to be able to use a computer. But also on the flip side is it's difficult to maintain that business tool behind the scenes. And a lot of you folks are already well aware that that's the problem. Then you add the complexity to it that the work's gone remote recently with the pandemic. So now we know that the attack vectors have grown. So if you look at it, we used to be safe behind a moat, and now the data's got out into the field. So the question we have to ask ourselves right now today from a business perspective is, are we driving our businesses forward with yesterday's technology from a speed perspective? And the answer is for most organizations, it's yes. It's we're not necessarily at that edge where we need to protect ourselves because we've gone from a luxury type of item to a necessity, and it's paramount for your business. So let's switch gears here real quick, and then we'll kind of answer some of the different questions that we've got right out there. So what we're looking at right here is we want to look at the cost of a breach to give you an idea of what it would cost from your perspective as far as the risk that goes. And Poneman does a study on an annual basis. This is the 2021 study, and we kind of synthesized some of the information. So the cost have gone up 10% for the cost of a breach between 2020 and 2021. On average now, it takes 287 days to identify and contain a breach. And the cost have gone up, like we said, about the 10%. So last year it was $146 per record on average. This year in 2021, it's about $161. But the kicker is if you look at the 51%, organizations are basically stating that on a 2-year cycle, 51% of the organizations have had a cyber incident. So think about that. Costs are going up 10% on an annual basis. The time to be able to contain is increasing, as well as the risk associated with it. So if you look at the breakdown for the different costs and everything, on average, and again, this is the global average, and it's dealing with enterprises as well as small to medium-sized businesses, is you have basically 4 costs: detection and escalation, the notification, the post-breach response, as well as the potential for lost business. And if you look right here, 29% of it is dealing with the detection and escalation. Notifications only 0.27%. The post-breach is 27%, and though 38% is dealing with a lot of the lost business. So we know that a data breach can really impact us on that basis. Now, just a couple more slides here, and we'll get to the punchline from a cost perspective. This is over the years from the Poneman study. If you look down below in 2015, on average, it was 275 days to contain a breach. Now, like we said before, we're at 287. And then I do have some information right here for you. This is from the 2019 average cost per record by industry sector from the Poneman study. So it's a couple years old, but the reason we wanted to put it up here is really depending upon what industry you're in or what sector you're in, the ramifications are different. So if you look at the top, $429 on average for healthcare. And if you go to the bottom, public sector, the cost typically is $78 per record. But again, as we said previously, the average cost is $161 right now in 2021 per record. So just a quick rough calculation so you can get an idea of what the cost would potentially be if you do have a compromise, is you can take the number of records that you have, the personal identifiable information, and multiply it by $161, and that will give you a total exposure. Now, in addition to that, other organizations may look at it and say, okay, if I'm down and I know what the cost per hour is, I can say the average time to recovery, and that could be my exposure as well. So, typically that might be something like, let's say, for example, manufacturing. The automotive industry can tell you how much it is per hour when the line is shut down. So you can be able to do that. So I'll give you just a quick moment here real quick to rough thumbnail it, just to get an idea. Just as a frame of reference, we've had healthcare organizations that have 100,000 records. And if you multiply that out times the 429, it's a pretty big exposure. We've had several organizations that maybe only have 1,000 records, and they might be at the 161. So it really depends upon how many records you've got and what that exposure is. But that really can then match up for you as an organization to figure out how much should we really spend on that defense. Okay, so now we've talked about the automobile and we've talked about the technology itself. It's really easy to have a conversation, so you need to protect yourself. But for most organizations, it's really the question is, how do I get started? And where do I go from here? So, the question is how do we know that we're safe? So what we've done is we've come up with a series of questions. We're going to do some polling questions for you right now, ask for your feedback. And then Jessica, as well as Jim, are both going to weigh in on each of these different questions along those lines. Now, we did get some questions in advance before we did the webinar, and we will address those questions after we've had a chance to go through the polls. So Valerie is one of our team members, and Darren as well. They're going to be behind the scenes. So we'll be queuing up the polling questions. And right here, the first question that we've got is, do you know what your crown jewels are? And so basically, Jim, I know you've been through this process. Jessica, you've helped clients go through this process too. Can you guys kind of explain what are the crown jewels and why is it important?
Yeah, I can start with that, Jim. Thank you. Your crown jewels are basically your critical data. This is important to your business and you can't live without it. So it's also unique to your business as well. And so this is obviously something that may be of interest to someone outside your company, maybe a competitor, maybe someone that's interested in holding your data ransom. So being able to identify that is really the first step, is to know really where your exposure is. And then I would also just consider, where do you stop with crown jewels? Because there's also a lot of data that you may say, well, I can probably live without that. Well, can you really? And what if you didn't have it? It is important to actually kind of walk through all of your data piece by piece, very specifically. And when you go through that process, you get an opportunity then to just reflect and go, yeah, we need to protect this and we need to do something extra here. So would you have anything to add, Jessica?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I would add in there too, depending on what industry you're serving, you could have a lot of sensitive information that's out there that, there's rules and regulations around how you need to safeguard and protect that sensitive information that may be in your possession. Even think about like your HR information, about your employees and things like that, very sensitive information. So, just like Jim said, make sure you know what it is that you're storing and where that data is you're storing. So, that first identification piece is very critical.
Thank you, Jessica. The numbers came in. 82% of the organizations on the webinar today believe that they understand what the crown jewels are and they've got them documented. So that leaves about 18% of the organization that could basically, through a very simple exercise, 48-hour investment, determine what's important to them. And then based on that, and then they can develop the strategies to protect themselves.
Yeah. One thing I might add to that, Jim, is I know that before we started our own process, I would say, yeah, we know it. We know what that stuff is. Absolutely. And I would say I came in about, our organization, we went through the process, actually was about 80% accurate in really knowing. Because after you go through the process, breaking it down, looking at every little piece of data, you start to change your mind and go, no, I can't live without that. And so just encouraging it. It seemed high, the 82%. That's encouraging. Don't get me wrong. That's great. But also, if you've gone through the process and gone into the minute details, that's critical to really understanding whether you understand your crown jewels or not.
Great. Thank you. Let's go to the next question here that the organizations can look at is, do you have the appropriate defenses in place to protect your data? You can say yes or no. And Jessica, what are your thoughts? What, for a lot of people, they say appropriate. What would appropriate be from your perspective?
Yeah. So, Jimmy, you need to take a step back again. And so look at, where you have that. That's why that first piece is so critical, and understanding where all that data is, right? So then you can put your defenses in place. And so, that could be, from a segmentation perspective of your network. It could be from, placement of firewalls or monitoring devices. It could be, auditing, logging on, various servers and things along those lines. Endpoint protection in the environment. There's a whole different, slew of different controls and measures and defenses you can put in place. It's again, really understanding, where's that data, and then start putting those defenses in front of those, because you could have some data in potential that is, more critical than others. So you may need to put, different layers in there. We always say, put as many hurdles in front of these bad guys as possible. So, that extremely critical data, may need, more defenses in place in front of it than, stuff that, is more sensitive, but not necessarily critical from that perspective. So, Jim, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think too is we threw a lot of different things out there: network segmentation, firewalls, and for some people that may be easy to understand for other people. It's like, nah, I let other people deal with that. And so I think the key takeaway in this one here is, if you don't know, or if you don't have people that know, ask for help. Bring in a third party that will come in and help you determine whether it's appropriate or not. They can give you reports, they can do assessments, they can do reports that show you, okay, yeah, we are doing our due diligence and following industry best practices. So yeah, don't shy away from that possibility, and it can be done reasonably affordably in most cases. So
thank you, Jim. Yeah, the results back here is 68% believe that they do have the appropriate in place. 32% are saying, I'm not sure. So that's relatively straightforward. A simple way to look at it too is you have the CIS 18 controls, as well as the NIST type of a standard. So typically that's what we recommend for organizations if you want to get started. And it really depends upon where you are as far as the size of business. If you're a small to medium sized business, something like the CIS or the basic NIST is going to work for you. As you move up and you become an enterprise, obviously there's going to be a lot more sophistication that's required and time and energy to devote to that. So good stuff there. Any additional comments, team?
good.
All right, let's go to the next question then. So do you know what software and hardware you're using? So if you have like an inventory list or something along those lines, let us know. Jim, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm an infrastructure guy. So to me, I look at that question and go, okay, this is basic blocking and tackling here of managing your systems. Do you have them well documented? Do you have all of this identified? Do you have all of the operating systems and everything that you need to know about your organization and how it interfaces and how it's all tied together? To me, that's really kind of the foundation of really knowing where you're at, because you really can't protect yourself if you don't know where the data is flowing. And that's exactly what this is getting at, is going, A, do you know what you got? And B, do you know how the data is flowing through it? So I say basic blocking and tackling, and yet there's still a lot of businesses out there that haven't chosen to do that, and they are running a little bit of a risk, a big risk, if they don't have that readily available. And honestly, it's making their jobs harder to actually support and create a stable environment if you don't have that all identified. So
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I would just add in there too, their technology's come a long way. So there's a lot of solutions out there that can help you with this. And also then that way you can monitor to know, what type, so that you're keeping track, like Jim said, of what's in our environment. So I mean, there, like I said, there's a lot of tools that can go out there that can pull, all the data or all the software that's running on devices and everything like that. And then that way you as an organization can understand too, and be able to monitor, okay, this is what we would expect, or, what is this? We should really look into this. And, why is this in our environment, and everything along those lines.
The good news is 90% of the participants feel that they have a good handle on software and hardware, and it's only questionable for 10%. So obviously a lot of organizations have that tripped up and taken care of at that point. So let's move right along here with an additional item that we can look for. And that is, do you know who has rights and access to your data? Jessica, why is that important?
Yeah. So, I mean, we always say, use the principle of least privilege. So individuals in your organization should not have access to things that they don't need to access to perform their job function. You always want to restrict access as much as possible so that you don't have, those potentials for employees to commit fraud or things along those lines. You also have to think about segregation of duties, making sure that you have your access rights set up appropriately to match the segregation of duties that you have in segregation of duty processes that you have in place. Again, it comes back to very simple, least privilege, only give them access to what they need to do their function.
Yeah, I might add to that I read an article a couple of weeks ago about how common it is to, when you have a vendor access your data, and most of organizations just hand over default full access because they really don't know what the vendor needs. And I think that's a big, that goes against what we're asking here. It's like, you do need to drill down into what do they really need. If they only need access to the data, only allow them to run reports. You know, and that goes for your employees too. If they don't need to be manipulating the data, inputting data, just give them access to running reports and that's it. And then they can pull the data out. And that really limits the exposure that you have to your crown jewels in that way. So this is a biggie. It does get pretty granular, and you got to roll up your sleeves, you got to make the investment, but it does, and you got to maintain it, but it does pay off in the long run.
Yeah, that was I was just going to say that was a really key point, Jim, when you said maintain it, right? So like making sure that you're regularly reviewing those access rights as well too, because we all know that employees change job functions. So regularly reviewing those access rights to make sure that they're continuing to stay in line once you have them set.
Good. That was the point I was going to make too. So the inputs in 87% feel that they've got control of the access. 13% isn't quite sure. So if you're in that,
that's higher than I would have expected. I really don't see a lot of organizations doing this at the level that you would expect. So I'm kind of surprised it's that high. I'm encouraged. I'll keep saying that. I'm encouraged. But make sure that you're not, I just put that warning shot out there. Make sure you're not making some assumptions there.
Well, you know, Jessica, you've been in the field for years with your team doing the technology risk assessments along those lines. And it kind of reinforces what Jim's talking about. A lot of times, depending upon where you are in the organization, you might have a feel and say, yes, we've got that covered. But you guys do a lot of testing, Jessica. What do you typically find when you do the testing?
Yeah, Jim. So, I mean, we do find that, you know, when people have, like I said, moved job functions, that their rights didn't get, you know, modified as they should. And they still have, so they got additional access because they needed that additional access to perform their job function, but they never took away the access that they had from their old job, which then essentially, depending on, you know, what functions that individual is performing, you know, could have some segregation of duties issues that arise. Also too, you know, regularly reviewing those terminated users, making sure those get off the systems. We find so many times when we go into organizations still with, you know, terminated employees who have active accounts on the system. So yeah, I mean, just, you know, making sure that, you know, you guys are staying on top of those.
Thank you. All right, so let's move along here. So we had a good feel for the access rights. Now it's basically saying, you know, do your team members understand their roles as well as responsibilities? Who wants to take this one?
Oh, can I take this one? I really want to take this one. So this one really speaks out to me in the sense that really what we're getting at here is end user security awareness training, because research shows that the easiest way for a bad actor to get into your data is through your people and through the choices they make in how they respond to email. And there are a lot of tools you can put in place, but it still comes down to the choice of whether to click or not click or follow up, and really to understand how they're being attacked. And so end user security training is the most effective way you can prevent a lot of this from happening. And yet, and to add to that, it's one of the lower expense, you know, so it's not an expensive thing to do, but it's got to be done, and it's got to be maintained, and it's got to be monitored and administered. So you got to put your due diligence to it, but this is the most effective way you can have an impact on your business. And yet a lot of people are not doing it today. So how about you, Jessica?
I would just echo that, Jim. I mean, we go in and we test our clients' employees to see how prone they are to click on a phishing email link that they get. And I mean, we have a ton of success in getting individuals to click on links that they shouldn't and then enter their login credentials for the system too. So, you know, I will say that, and in all of the breaches too that we've seen and we've worked with, you know, the biggest thing is that it happens usually because somebody clicked on something that they shouldn't have, or they opened an attachment they shouldn't have, and it let those bad actors in. So, I mean, it comes back to, you know, making sure you're regularly staying in front of those employees, making sure that they understand, you know, their reporting, responsibilities. very, very, like Jim was said, basic things that, your employees need to be aware of the risks that are out there and what they need to do to protect and safeguard the data.
I think it's like anything else too, is that when you have end user training and you're doing it once a month and it's consistent and it's structured, it stays in the forefront of their minds. Whereas if you said, well, we did it last May, the chances are that most people aren't going to remember that. It's that constant care and feeding and the reminder, bringing it up in staff meetings. It's saying, hey, you can make a difference in our organization by protecting us here in this area. That is very huge.
It's interesting here. The 36% said yes, that people understand, and a whopping 64% said no. The associates don't.
And it's easy to fix. It is easy to fix, in my opinion. It's easy to fix. So.
And it's a low price point too. There's quite a few really good solutions that are out on the marketplace. We have a couple that at our disposal that we leverage, and we've got quite a few clients using other systems as well. And Jim, you were talking about the administration, all those types of things. You can source that all out. Correct. And get it for a very low price point and really have a big impact. Good stuff. What any additional thoughts on this question, team?
No,
all right,
I think we beat that one to death.
Okay, have you tuned and calibrated what you've put in place? Jim, what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, this one, this is huge in the sense that if you've made the investment into some tools, some software to make sure that you're protected and that you're doing your due diligence in that area. Keeping it tuned, keeping it calibrated is critical. I think back when I saw this question, I thought back, I don't know, we've talked about the Target breach back in 2013. It was known that they, months before they were breached and all their credit card information was stolen, that they had applications purchased, installed, but they hadn't tuned it, they hadn't calibrated, they hadn't done their due diligence to finish rolling that out. Had they done that, it would have minimized the impact of that breach. And so I always go back to that example when I hear this, is going, it's one thing to say, yep, we bought the tool. It's another thing to say, okay, are you actively managing it? Is it a part of your business? And how seriously are you taking that part of your business to make sure you're getting the full value out of that investment? And this is where, if you're a small to medium-sized business and you don't have that capability, there are other organizations out there that do that. We do that, to be able to come in and help you make sure it's tuned and calibrated to fit your business needs.
Yeah, I would just add that during our testing, so we do a lot of vulnerability penetration testing for our clients. And so many times we find where, just what you said, Jim, they've got the tools in place. The tools are monitoring, but nobody's paying attention to the alerts. And so you have to make sure that, you've got them tuned, you've got them calibrated, you're getting the appropriate alerts on, items that you should be alerted on. And then also to make sure somebody's paying attention to those. Somebody's got to, you guys have to be watching those to make sure that, you're aware of what's happening out there. So, very important, because yes, it's great that, you get the tool, but got to make sure that, the tool's working and doing its job.
We see that quite a bit, actually, because one of the things we ask is, or go in and look at, and is, are you logging the activity on, say, your firewall and your switches and that kind of thing, and on your servers? And the answer oftentimes, well, yeah, we're logging. And it's like, okay, so who's responsible for looking at that? And they're going, oh, you got to be kidding me. There's like thousands of records that come through every single day. It's like, oh, well. You might need to take a look at what you've got as far as a tool that does that for you, then that escalates certain things and starts integrating some artificial intelligence and starts sorting through that to help you. And that's what we're talking about, where you need it tuned and calibrated to be able to give you the information at the time that you need it.
So Jim, most organizations, they don't really have the skill set. If you're a small to medium-sized business, can you really deploy the AI and all those different things?
Yeah, most of the time not. You're going to have to get some help. You're going to have to get some help in that area. And that kind of goes back to where we started with this presentation, going, well, it's not built into a lot of the software and the product offerings today. And so it's all an add-on, and it's got to come out from outside. I firmly believe that over time, we're starting to see it already, where there's more and more integration of the tools into what we have available today. But for right now, it's an add-on, and it has to be managed and monitored and addressed, and you need that skill set.
Interesting here, 60% said no, they do not tune and calibrate. So 40% are saying they're watching the till, and 60% of participants today believe there's room for improvement.
Yeah, and I can believe those numbers. That to me sounds pretty reasonable based upon what I'm seeing as well in the industry.
I would agree.
Great. Okay, let's move ahead here. Do you have the ability to ascertain if you've been compromised? What's that mean, team, and how do you do that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it comes back again to understanding, and we're talking about the ability to detect things in the environment. So you got to think about like your logging that you have in place. So when it comes to monitoring those logs, are you seeing critical events that would show that you may have a potential compromise within your environment? Taking another step back, do you have the tools to be able to essentially alert you and do those things? You really have to be, have things set up. We've walked into so many organizations where it's like they don't have any logging configured on any servers or any devices or anything like that. It's very hard for an organization to be able to know if they've been breached if they don't have anything that they can look at to say, okay, what happened, where did this, get in, things along those lines. So again, it comes back to, that logging, that monitoring, that alerting you to certain events that are essentially flags to be able to say, we could have been compromised, we could have a breach on our hands here.
Yeah, the obvious answer is when you try to get your data and a message comes up that says you can get your data by calling this number and talking to us, and we'll get you an encrypted key to unlock it. That's stating the obvious. I think really what we're getting at here is, can you tell ahead of time? Are there any early warning messages that determine, hey, is there anything out there that's going on? And there are. I mean, I was referencing earlier some applications regarding artificial intelligence. There are some activity that we look for. For instance, if you're seeing applications going between laptops, that's called lateral movement. And that's a big key takeaway right there, that something not right is going on, because rarely do laptops talk to each other. They usually go directly out to the internet, to the firewall, that sort of thing. So that's something to keep in mind. And it's, if it doesn't smell good, it probably doesn't. It probably isn't. And that's kind of where we're at, is when we see something, we're going, it usually warrants a little further digging to find out what's going on there, because most people are not doing things out of line on purpose or accidentally. And so when you're seeing like lateral movement, when you're seeing things starting to happen, it definitely warrants some attention, and to get ahead of it on the front end and start doing some extra effort to make sure you don't have a bigger problem down the road.
Thank you, Jim. Interesting. 59% said yes, they have the ability to figure out if they've been compromised, compared to 41%. So, it sounds like a lot of organizations have the pulse on this, and yet some other people know that there could be some room for improvement along those lines. Good stuff. Let's keep going right along here. The next question is hold on, got to get to there. There we go. Do you have the ability to respond and recover in the event that you're compromised? What are your thoughts on that, team?
Yeah, so first and foremost, incident response plan, right? So do you have an incident response plan in your organization to be able that in the event, okay, we know that something's going on, we can see signs of a compromise, what is our plan for responding to that incident and then recovering? I mean, you got, a lot of things to, consider in there, identifying, what is, what's going on in the environment. Do we have ransomware in the environment? Has an account been breached? really first understanding, what's going on, what access, to, information has the outsider potentially gotten. A lot of people, should have third parties already lined up in the incident response plan that can help them. We help a number of our clients, respond and recover to breaches that happen. You should have those organizations identified ahead of time so that you're not scrambling, when something does happen in the environment. And then, really systematically walking through and identifying, you may need forensics to understand, what data was potentially, taken from the organization, things along those lines. So, what I would say is, again, having that plan set ahead of time is really going to save you a lot in dealing and responding to the incident. So, Jim?
Yeah, there's two words here that I want to focus on: respond and recover. And the thing with respond that we have found in the incident response is being to identify when an incident response needs action. And so I think that's the biggest thing with respond and having that in your incident response plan is, can you identify when you really want to respond and when you need to take that first step? And that's important to identify that in the IR plan. And then the recover, practice the recover, practice the testing, test your plan, do some tabletop exercises. That will help you tremendously down the road. It's really no different than a disaster recovery business continuity in that respect. That's exactly what you're doing in that instance. And so you want to test it. You want to make sure that all of the items are ready to go should you ever need it. And there again, it's just rolling up your sleeves and getting into the details and making it happen.
The good news here is 81% believe that they are prepared to respond and recover, with only 19% saying that they wouldn't be prepared.
Yeah.
And again, we talked about the days, 287 days. There was a question in advance, and we can, kind of quasi pull it into here right now. It talked about cyber resiliency along those lines. I know, Jessica, you had some thoughts on it. Do you want to add to what we've got here? Address that one question that we had.
Yeah, so I mean, that, like I said, kind of ties into the whole incident response plan. So it's not only, systems and things like that you have to have in place, but you have to have that governance structure in place as well. So, it really comes into, do we have the appropriate governance strategy in place, again, to be able to, respond and recover from these events. So, we've seen a number of organizations, get hit with these events. They have no plans. They have, no organizations to help them to contact. They don't have cyber insurance. So that's another big thing, right? If your organization doesn't have cyber insurance, I would look into that. The other thing I would say is we're seeing so much, it needing to be in place from the cyber insurance to be able to get that. So again, you need to make sure that your organization has the proper controls in place. So from a couple insurance providers, recently we've seen, a requirement that MFA be in place for all remote connections and all administrative accounts that are on your network, whether they're accessing it remotely or not. So, things to consider there. But cyber insurance is another part of that cyber resiliency piece that, you want to consider, in addition to, having all your appropriate plans in place.
Thank you, Jessica. Okay, let's keep moving along here. There we go. And it says, there we go. Do you have a program in place to maintain and keep current your systems and hardware?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So there's a lot of ways to do this. I mean, third parties provide it, we provide it, but also it's built into Windows to make sure that you're, from a Windows operating system standpoint, you're keeping that software current. And these are targets. The operating system is full of holes. They're constantly getting exploited, especially when new updates come out. And so you got to make sure those are staying current and that you're updating those. And then one other thing is you're only as current as the last time you rebooted your system, because a lot of times that software is installed, but it really doesn't get loaded into memory and apply until you actually reboot your system, your server, your laptop, that kind of thing. And so there's just constant ways, and we're recommending our clients to make sure that when they get to the end of the day, just hit restart and let your laptop restart, but don't log in. Just let it restart. That way, patches, updates can come down automatically when you're not using it overnight, and it works in the background, and then it's ready to go for you first thing in the morning. So things like that, having a regular maintenance schedule and a maintenance window for your servers, for the organizations that are 24/7, you still got to have some downtime to make sure your servers and your applications are restarted and updated. So that's critical, because these vendors are constantly pushing out fixes to their systems and to their software. And what we find a lot of times when there is a breach, most of the time it's old software, and they exploited a vulnerability of something that could have easily been prevented had they been on a routine basis of keeping their software current. So
yeah, and I would just add too, like vulnerability management program, right? So having a vulnerability management program where you're continuously scanning your devices to see how vulnerable they are and what patches may be missing, things along those lines.
Great. The feedback is good news. 85% of the organizations feel that they've got a system in place to maintain the hardware and software. So 15% say that they could definitely improve from that vantage point. So the questions that we've had right here, pretty much we've had a chance to go through. And so really at this point in time, from our perspective is these are just only the beginning of questions that you can ask. But a lot of times as we talk to organizations and say, are you current? How do you get there? We talked about that crossroad. How do you get there? So really it's ask the questions, get the answers, and then you really want to be able to take action. So, with that, the questions we've asked today, we're going to provide that information to you. We'll follow up with an email with the questions that you've got to help start that dialogue. Let's open it up to more general questions. So if you have general questions, you can IM us. We'll definitely answer those questions. We do have some that we did receive in advance that we'll start answering now. And as the other questions trickle in, then we can definitely do that. And so from that vantage point, we'll do that. And at this point, Jim, somebody asked about, from a manufacturing perspective,
right,
what are we seeing on the horizon in regards to manufacturers like CNC machines and all the different aspects on the plant floor? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so they talked about, how do you protect your PLCs and your HMIs? And if you're in the manufacturing world, you know what those acronyms stand for. The thing is that those have unique operating systems. And so whether they have vulnerabilities or not, a lot of times you're still implementing the same practices, and that is you're controlling the traffic going in and out of those devices. So you really kind of work with it. I know there's a lot of vendors that you can approach it two ways. You can either put an agent to protect that device on that device, but in this case, the operating systems are somewhat unique, and vendors are slow to actually get applications to run in there. And frankly, not all of us really want to put anything unnecessary on these devices. And so the next step is you control it at the egress. So right where it connects to a network, that's at that port that you can manage the security in that at that point in the network. So there are ways to do that through network segmentation, making sure that you have systems in place to look for any lateral movement, that kind of thing. That will address a large part of this. And it's catching up. It's not there yet. Internet of Things is still, they're still trying to deal with a lot of that out there as far as getting that locked down. But you really have to manage it right now at the network level. So,
well, Jim, they're coming out with solutions. I know, for example, one of the vendors we deal with is WatchGuard. They've got a solution that they've built, as well as Fortinet has what they call Fortinac, which they're targeting the manufacturing and doing those different types of things. So I agree with you 100%, Jim. Really, the answer is today is it's back to the basics. Do the same fundamentals that you're doing for your network today. They're building out the APIs. They're building out those capabilities. Stay tuned. There are solutions. But one trick that we really want to tell you is you got to be careful about buying something off the shelf and then feeling protected. So, and not to disparage off the shelf solutions, because we use them with our clients all the time. And that's a good, sound business practice to do that. There's a however though, and the however is really you need to do the upfront analysis and really understand what is the risk and what are you trying to accomplish. By just putting together a patchwork of different potential solutions, it's kind of like if you want to dam a river, and if you put pylons across half the river, the water's still going to flow around those pylons unless you put the solution all across the river and dam it up. And so that's the same thing. The water's going to find that course of least resistance, and that will be the same thing. If you don't strategically figure out what the issue is, what the risks are, and how you can mitigate those risks by just taking off the shelf solutions, it could be dangerous. So Jim, thanks for that feedback. Jessica, any additional thoughts on that?
I don't think so. No, I think you guys covered it great.
Okay, great. There was a question about cryptocurrencies, and the answer is we could go for about 4 hours on that topic. And I'm not sure who asked the cryptocurrency. The question was, can we finally talk about cryptocurrencies? The answer is yes, at another time. And if you'd like to, I'd be more than happy to have a one-on-one dialogue with anybody. I've been tracking the industry for about 4 or 5 years. I have dabbled in it and have a whole bunch of opinions on it. I'm not sure if it's going to be applicable to everybody across the board today on that. So definitely we can follow up with whoever wants to have a crypto conversation.
I'm just thinking that the answer is be careful what you ask for when you ask that to Jim Karp, because he will take that to as deep as you want to take it. So.
To an extreme, you're right about
exactly.
that. There's no doubt about that. We have some additional questions that are out there too. Let's see, cyber resiliency. Let's go back. Backups. There's a question on backups. Jessica, I think you wanted to address that question.
Yeah, so the question was, basically, is offsite hourly cloud backup a usable last resort protection against ransomware if the first line defenses fail, advanced malware, employee training, etc.? So I would say, offsite hourly cloud backup is great. However, a lot of times what we see is when ransomware gets in the environment, it goes after the backups. So you want to make sure that you do have a copy of your backups, and you need to determine based on your business, what does that time frame look like, right? But make sure you have a copy that's air gapped from the network so that if ransomware does get in the environment, it's not going to encrypt your backups. So just something to consider there.
And then it gets into the conversation of RPO and RTO, recovery point objective. How much data do you feel you can lose if you're willing to lose some data? For example, if your Visa or MasterCard at Christmas time, there's 25,000 transactions per second. How much data can you afford to lose? You can't. And then the other question is RTO, recovery time objective. How long can you go without the data? And I know, Jim, we do a bunch of backups for our clients all along different ranges, different sizes. But in some cases, it takes some time to recover that data, depending upon, for example, Jessica's talking about having it air gapped. So Jim, your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, so if you've got a fair amount of data, like more than a terabyte or two of data, you want to back it up locally first and then replicate it out to the cloud. That way restores can go quickly. If you immediately take it directly to the cloud, you're basically at a disadvantage for doing the restore, because now you're restoring it over this tiny little pipe called the internet that you have into your business. And that's usually much smaller than what you have just in your network within your 4 walls. So, if you still have servers on site and you got to restore data along that line, there's ways to do that well and to be able to recover quickly. But there again, you want to make sure you set it up so it is air gapped, so that you don't have that hop from local to the cloud. So
thank you, Jim. We do have one question that came in, and it basically says, in case of breaches, do you know what percentage is done through poking and breaching the firewalls, and what percentage is done through employee mistakes? Click on a link or an attachment. Any thoughts from you folks?
Well, I would say from experience, It depends. I do know that there's a fair amount of, if you still have remote desktop services or RDS open on your firewall, that was a lot of times people use that for remote access for years and they just haven't shut it off and there's still a server responding to that. That's a real quick and easy way to come through your firewall. I mean, that's not hard to do, put it that way, and then compromise your internal systems. So that's, and honestly, it's kind of interesting because you put a device out on the internet with a public IP. I mean, it takes seconds and you've already got people all over the world scanning that device. It just does not take long for them to know what's out there. So obviously getting your firewall locked down, it just takes a little bit of due diligence, but it's not hard, it's not complicated from that standpoint to create a really good firewall. I would say, I don't have the stats in front of me, but I would say a majority of the compromises come through your end users. That's your biggest attack vector right now. It's your people. So
absolutely, 100% agree. In the incidents that we've dealt with and we've seen, that's the biggest way people are getting in, is through employees clicking on something or opening something they shouldn't have.
As I recall, and I don't think it's in the 2021 study with Poneman and IBM when we talked about the data breach, but I think back in 2020, they actually do address what is the most likely event that things are happening. And I think it's like a third of the incidents are coming through glitches in the software where you're not anticipating something. A third is by internal resources making a mistake. And then a third is through the associate. So I remember it's about a third. So a third of the mistakes coming from me making a mistake and clicking on something. Another one is setting it up inappropriately. And then that last third of the equation was dealing with just basically sometimes software isn't completely thought through. Even though you deploy it, there might be a condition or situation that there is a glitch associated with it.
And I do remember that same statistic, Jim. And I remember that you often said that, look at this, it's a third. 2 of the 3 items are preventable on your part, the business owner, and how impactful that was for me to hear you say that as well in that presentation. So
you got it. Okay, I think at this point we haven't received any additional questions. And so where I think we can go to next is pretty much, basically saying thank you for participating today. So again, if we look back at everything, the initial premise is to basically say, along the analogy of a car, is the car became more sophisticated and went from being a luxury to a necessity. And at that point in time, they baked in all of the security measures. Unfortunately, in the technology world that we're living in today, not all of those measures have been baked in. And so a lot of times we might be operating under assumptions that we're safe when we're moving along at the speed of, high speed like your cars do. So, from that vantage point, that's why we wanted to step back. And most organizations say, well, if I'm an executive or somebody that doesn't deal with IT all the time, how do I get started? So that's why we created these questions. We'll follow up with those questions. Now, also what we're going to do is we're going to send to you just a 1-pager, and it basically says basic tactics. And because the next question we get, and we didn't want to go into this today as far as all the tools and all that stuff, because that's a 2-hour discussion, is now, how do I translate what we said with these questions into what can I do to prevent it? So we will be providing to you a basic document that says here at a very small standard, and then maybe at a medium standard, here's some of the different tactics that you can deploy. Caution though, and the caution is that this is where we talk about that quilt work and the patchwork of everything. I'll have one of these, one of those, one of these. It really has to be part of a master strategy. Jessica touched on it before from a governance perspective. You need to make sure you cover the waterfront so that you got everything taken care of. And then here's some of the tools that you can leverage. If you just go straight to this one thing, you may not have the appropriate protection in place depending upon all the different constraints that you've got in your business. So Jim and Jessica, any final comments that you'd like to share with the team?
I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. We are always happy and here to help. So if your organization, needs any help, feel free to reach out, and we very much appreciate your time today. Thank you.
yeah, likewise. And in Hill Street Blues, I think that was the movie where they said, be safe out there.
Perfect.
All right, thanks everybody. And we'll be following up with additional information. As always, feel free to reach out to Raymond. Like I said, this team has been in place. It's not Johnny come lately. These folks have been at this for 10, 15 years plus, and we've got the solutions to help organizations. Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye.